Drug overdose deaths have reached an epidemic level. Fentanyl is now the #1 killer of Americans under the age of 50, and it's more important than ever to have easy access to naloxone, which can reverse opioid overdoses. In fact, naloxone has saved the lives of tens of thousands of people.
No one talked to me about naloxone for Aaron. No one talked to me about the potential for overdose.
On this episode of Grieving Out Loud, I'm honored to be joined by Justin Phillips, a woman who has been at the forefront of making naloxone more accessible. Her mission? To prevent others from experiencing the heartache that she has after her son died from an overdose.
We have a culture that believes a substance, whatever form it is a solution to what's going on with us. And that's what I think we really have to get away from somehow, is that something outside of me is going to fix me.
I'm Angela Kennecke, your host of Grieving Out Loud and the founder of Emily's Hope. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope this episode leaves you more informed about our nation's drug crisis and inspired to make a difference. Plus, we do want to bring comfort to those who, like me, have lost a child to overdose or fentanyl poisoning. Well, Justin, it is so nice to see you again. Thank you for coming on Grieving Out Loud.
Thank you, Angela, for having me here. It is good to see you again, too.
Yeah, we ran into each other a couple of times as we've both been doing advocacy work in different areas of the country.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We have to belong to this. Some people call it a club. I don't really like that word, but that we share this common, difficult challenge in our life. But that I'm also grateful for the people I get to meet like you.
Right. I always say the same thing. I hate it that we meet under these circumstances, but I'm so happy to know you.
Yes.
And it's wonderful to see you again. We last encountered each other in Washington, D.C. on International Overdose Awareness Day.
Yes, we did. It's a beautiful day, actually.
It was a beautiful
Sad,
day.
but beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Right. We were invited. I wrote a blog about it. If people want to go to that, we'll leave it in the show notes. But I wrote a blog about my experience with getting to go to that meeting. They call it at the White House, on the White House grounds, and meeting with some top officials. And you were there, and you were really a leader in that aspect. Do you think those kinds of meetings, those kinds of gatherings can make a difference?
I think they make a difference because I think we get recognized. I think our faces are seen. I think our beautiful loved ones' faces are seen. I think if we stop seeing people's faces, that we forget that it's happening.
Right. And one thing that I really want to see is politics or candidates kind of taken out of this altogether, because we have to work with whatever administration is in office. I went to some rallies a couple of weeks later, and some of them were specifically almost really campaigning for one candidate. And I just thought, that's not what we want either. We want to be able to work with whoever is in office.
It shouldn't be a political issue. Unfortunately, people use it on their political platform. It shouldn't be a political issue. Every candidate should understand harm reduction, and every candidate should understand the necessary resources it's going to take to get us out of this crisis. But people are always going to politicize issues. Angela, unfortunately, you know that.
Right. And I think also it's easy for some candidates or some political movements to almost prey on those who have lost loved ones, because you're really vulnerable, especially, in those early months and years. You're really vulnerable.
100%. I think there's an unfortunate narrative around fentanyl that's existing right now that is being used to prey on those that are really vulnerable, and I hate to see it happening.
Right. I agree with you on that. Well, let's let our listeners know a little bit about how you got into this line of work that we're both doing now. Let's start with the story of your son, Aaron. Justin says the story of her son's battle with substances began before he was even born. Research reveals that substance use disorder can be inherited and influenced by complex interactions among multiple genes and the environment.
The part of the story that I think has value to the whole trajectory of Aaron's experience was that myself and Aaron's father have both been in recovery from alcohol use disorder way before our children were born. So our children were raised with the knowledge that it's possible genetically to have substance use disorder, and they were also raised with the knowledge that recovery is possible, right? And they were exposed to recovery and all the things.
Despite being aware of the danger of drugs and his genetic predisposition, Aaron decided to try opioids, which eventually led to a full-blown heroin addiction when he was 20 years old.
When Aaron told me he was using heroin and could not stop on his own, I didn't understand opioids in much the same way the rest of the country didn't understand opioids. And so I did what I thought was best, and we followed the path that many people follow with treatment and that type of thing. And
Do you think that Aaron suffered from substance use disorder because of his genetics or his environment or a combination of those things?
I think it's impossible to know. I think Aaron had a personality that was a little more of a risk taker. He was also very sensitive, very, very, very sensitive, very empathic, very sensitive. He had codeine cough medicine as a toddler. Who's to say that didn't change his neurotransmitters from an early age? He had lots of orthopedic injuries. He was a very talented athlete. I don't know with Aaron if it was chicken or egg, but what I do know is that opioids are highly addictive and very difficult to stop.
I mean, you could be describing my daughter in many ways because she also was a risk taker and was sensitive and an athlete. So, you've got these kids, and it's just so, once they start down this road as a parent, it is just so overwhelming and difficult.
Yes, it's so difficult. And this is what I say to people all the time, that the behavior that comes with substance use is very illogical and it's harmful to the people that love and care about the individual. And the solution is not simple, right? I can't just take you to the doctor and get you an antibiotic and you get better. Actually, it might take you 7 times to go to treatment before you get better. You have to really want it and you have to be really disciplined, and it's just very enormous, right? It's very complex. Very complex.
You're right.
We have a culture that believes a substance, whatever form it is a solution to what's going on with us. And that's what I think we really have to get away from somehow, is that something outside of me is going to fix me.
Right, right. And often it is, yes, people are self-medicating when they're using substances. And I think you're right. I have parents contact me every day. What do I do? What do I do? And if the answers were easy, I always say my daughter would still be alive. Your son would still be alive, right? If we had
Right.
easy answers when someone is suffering from this disease of the brain, it's just so, so difficult. And I wish I could offer somebody a pat answer or a simple solution.
I know, me too, 100%.
Unfortunately for Justin, the answers certainly weren't easy. Despite getting her middle child into treatment, he still died from a heroin overdose at age 20.
It was just actually 10 years on October the 9th, which is really unimaginable for me most of the time.
Over those 10 years, Justin has learned a lot about grief. She's been using that information to help others, even becoming a grief counselor.
Grief, not to use the word again, but it's true. It's very complex, and it's been a very interesting journey. What I knew from the beginning that I shared with my 2 surviving children is that we have to process this. We have to figure out what works best for us.
One of the ways Justin processes her grief is through journaling. That's also been recommended by other grief counselors who've been guests on this podcast.
I can put my thoughts down on paper and then I can leave them there. I have written to Aaron from almost the very beginning. I have 10 years worth of journals of talking to Aaron, and I sometimes do better. Like, my measure of better is that I go to the cemetery less, right? I write less than I did in the beginning, but I always would address it to Aaron in various ways. Dear Aaron, or dear baby boy, and today I'm mad at you, or today I miss you, or can you please show up? I believe 100%, Angela, in signs, and I look for them, and I'm desperate for them, and I ask for them, and they bring me comfort. I've been learning a lot about how grief is really a form of a traumatic brain injury, and how I need to work on retraining my brain. There is some level of PTSD involved, and I need to help myself process. Like I said, I've really just got to continue to process and be proud or be graceful with myself. If all I did today was get up and brush my teeth and brush my hair and show up in the best way that I could, that is a big win. And I'm not always, willing to accept that, but it's the truth, right? Some days are better than others. And that whole cliche thing about grief being like waves is 100% true. And there are the waves that pull me down. And then there are the waves that lap at my feet. And I know that despite the fact that it's been 10 years and maybe it's better because I go to the cemetery less, it's never going to not be a part of me. It is a part of me. And I'm not going to be ashamed of that. I'm going to carry it as part of the journey. Aaron is a part of me, and his loss is a part of me, and part of who I am today.
Well, I would agree with everything you said. I want to dive into it a little bit deeper. I've had a grief expert, a thanatologist, on the podcast a couple of times. And one thing he strongly recommends is writing to your loved one, keeping that conversation going. And you just sort of did that instinctually, or is that something you picked up from somewhere?
I did. I've always been a journaler, so it's probably because I always had been a journaler.
Does Aaron ever answer back?
Honestly, he has answered back a couple times. Yep.
And I think about the other thing about signs, and I feel like I had a lot of signs early on, maybe in the first couple of years, and I feel like I don't get them now, and I want them. And then at first I thought, was that really a sign, or is it just me wanting it to be a sign? And then my grief counselor at the time says, what does it matter? What does it matter? If you find comfort in that sign, what kinds of signs do you get from Aaron?
So it started out with the simple signs, the sort of universal signs, the cardinals and the butterflies. There was a significance for me of a feather. I had a cousin when the day Aaron passed away who was walking on a labyrinth, and she reached out to me and said that when she was walking the labyrinth, a feather floated down. And so for me, feathers, which I know is a fairly common universal sign as well. And then I read this book, and forgive me, Angela, I cannot remember the author, but it's called Signs. It's written by a medium, and she describes in the book how to ask for your own signs for your loved ones specifically, and how to be very specific. If you want to be specific, if you want it to be a purple elephant, by all means, but then you have to watch for it. So I did that last year on Aaron's day of passing, and I decided I would ask for skateboards. And skateboarders are not as common as when Aaron was an adolescent, although it maybe is coming back. So I asked for skateboards, and in all the random places. In the terminal of the Dallas airport, not in the terminal like for the gate before you get through security, but actually through security, a skateboarder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the things for me. And sometimes it's very subtle, right? Sometimes it is just the cardinal in a random place, but it's okay. I'm going to take it because I need it.
Right.
And I need to believe, and I do believe that Aaron is around.
And the other thing I think you hit the nail on the head, because I have said this since the beginning, since Emily first died. I felt like I had a traumatic brain injury. I felt like I couldn't remember things, and I mean, there were just things that I couldn't do, and it's taken me so long, and even my memory, and I now I'm 5 years older than I was, when she died, but I don't think it has anything to do with age. My memory has started to improve a little bit, but
Mhm.
that is one thing I noticed I did. I felt like I wasn't me anymore. Something had happened to my brain and my heart.
Well, there's some real true scientific evidence around the fact that there is something called brain fog, grief, brain fog. Our brain is hardwired for survival. That's the first thing our reptilian portion of our brain does for us is it keeps us safe when we're threatened. And this is something that we don't have experience with unless we do. But when we're faced with a situation where we have nothing to pull from in the portion of our brain where we store our memories to help us know how to respond to keep ourselves safe is sort of why we feel so lost, because we don't have any information to go on. We can walk through the things people tell us to walk through in the beginning, planning the funeral, but we did all of that stuff, at least for me, Angela, in a complete fog. I can see
Yes.
myself there, but I'm not physically really
Right.
there.
Right. I think that would be the case for most people, right?
Right. I think
Yeah.
so too.
And you talked about, trauma is such a big word now, and everybody uses the word trauma, and everybody says, "Oh, I'm traumatized," or it's bringing back my trauma. And I think people really don't know what trauma is until they've been through
Right.
the death of a child. But you talked about like rewiring your brain. One of the things I always worry about, because I talk to middle to high schoolers, I bring Emily's story to a lot of kids about, I think it's been about 16,000, 17,000 students by now,
It's wonderful.
maybe more. And I always talk about the day that she died because I really want them to listen, right? And that really
Mhm.
captures their attention. But at the same time, I feel like I'm re-traumatizing myself by bringing myself back there. It's hard for me. Like some people want me to do 2 or 3 presentations in a day if I come to their community, and I'm like, no, no. But how do you kind of deal with that trauma and rewire it? What's worked for you?
Well, I think that has really legitimate accuracy, Angela, that when we relive the event that has caused, us to experience trauma, that we will be re-traumatized. I have to know that my capacity is only this much. And I have to do self-care before, and I have to do self-care after, and I have to be willing to say no. I compartmentalize pretty well around all of it, but it still doesn't mean it doesn't affect me.
Right. Right.
If this is what we're choosing to do, right, to affect change by sharing the story, then we just have to do that self-care before and after.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That's part of the reason my husband drives me to almost all of my speaking engagements, because I'm just wiped out afterwards, as if I had run a marathon or something like that.
Right. Well, there's a lot of adrenaline involved in
Yeah,
reliving something.
right, right. But yet I feel compelled to keep doing it because if just one of those kids listens, if just gets through to one of those children. Have you lost a loved one to overdose or fentanyl poisoning? I'd like to invite you to share their story on our new Emily's Hope Memorial website called More Than Just a Number. They were our children, siblings, cousins, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, and friends. So much more than just a number. You can submit a memorial today on morethanjustanumber.org. After her son's death, Justin also channeled her grief into preventing future tragedies. She formed a nonprofit named Overdose Lifeline that seeks to help those suffering from substance use disorder. She's been instrumental in making naloxone, a medication that can reverse opioid overdoses, more accessible. In fact, her advocacy work even led to an Indiana state law named after her son.
Oddly enough, I was working for the state of Indiana at the time, managing federal highway traffic safety dollars. My background is injury prevention. So some of the staff in my office thought maybe I'd want to go to this roundtable where the police and other community stakeholders were talking about the increase in heroin. And I learned about naloxone, which is the overdose reversal drug many people call Narcan. And it shocked me and disappointed me that I didn't know about naloxone. No one talked to me about naloxone for Aaron. No one talked to me about the potential for overdose. So
Right.
that's really how Overdose Lifeline was born. Increase access to naloxone and raise awareness and education, because if I didn't know as a fairly well-educated person, then what did the rest of us not know?
Right. And I think one of the things that you've done since Aaron's death is work in this nonprofit world, in this world of addiction and of overdose and fentanyl. And sometimes I think, because I'm doing the same thing, I'm just 5 years behind you. I think it's sometimes a heavy way to live, right? To live in this space where you lost someone in this way and you're constantly immersed in the issue.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I was talking today with a staff member about how I really used to love to cook, and I don't seem to really have the bandwidth by the time I'm done with my day. And it's probably because
Yeah,
of what you just said, right?
right.
But it's also very rewarding, and I don't know what else to do, Angela. And I'm sure that I can't do it forever, but this is the path that I've been given. This is the hand, as we say, that I've been dealt, and I want to make a difference. Originally, I thought increasing access to naloxone, passed the law in 2015, allowing naloxone to be available without a prescription in Indiana. I thought that would make the world of difference. And then the increase in fentanyl and everything came along, and we're still just losing way too many people all the time. But people call me and say they saved someone, and people do get that second chance. And so I think that's what really keeps me going. And we have some other programs with kids and pregnant women who are getting a second chance that I think also keep me going, because what I really want to do is make it better for other people, because the situation, that you and I have found ourselves in is pretty hard, right?
Right. We don't want anyone else to go through it. And I do feel like sometimes you see this increase in overdose slash fentanyl poisoning deaths, and it feels like you're rowing a boat with a hole in it, right? Like you
100%.
feel like you got this naloxone out there in Indiana. So you've had it over the counter for years. We just got it over the counter because of the new federal law. So I'm just working to get it dispersed across my state so many years behind you. It just seems like sometimes the solutions are right in our face and a bit obvious, but the time it takes to get there can be frustrating.
It's very frustrating, and it's a very stigmatized, shame-filled situation for the individual who suffers, for the family that's affected. People just judge it, and we're still a long way from getting rid of that. Originally, when I set up the nonprofit, the vision was about substance use disorder being treated like any other chronic disease. And until we get that same sort of level of respect, we're still going to probably be rowing the boat with a hole in it. But
Y-
the hole maybe is smaller.
Yeah, I know we're not there yet. I just met two young women about the same age who received our Emily's Hope treatment scholarships while they were in treatment. We help subsidize treatment at a facility that's connected to a health system, and it's medically assisted treatment, medically assisted detox, those kinds of things. And both of these women were fired from their jobs while they were in treatment. And if anything told me that the stigma still exists, I mean, it's
Right.
that situation. We were able to help them stay in treatment, thank God. But if you were being treated in the hospital for heart disease or diabetes, would you be fired from your employer? Would anybody do that? And would they be able to get away with it?
Well, they wouldn't get away with it, I'm guessing, right? This is the only disease where if we have a setback, right? Some people call it a relapse. I prefer to call it a setback, that we kick someone out of treatment as opposed to adjusting the treatment plan. And our approach just, is pretty archaic.
An archaic approach that has left hundreds of thousands of people grieving the loss of a loved one who could not overcome substance use disorder. If you or a loved one is struggling, please head over to our website, emily'shope.charity, for a list of helpful resources. What is different now for you, 10 years later, as opposed to maybe the first few years after the loss of Aaron?
I think I mentioned in some ways I'm better, right? So I don't feel the need to go to the cemetery.
Well, also, don't you think that our children kind of live in our hearts after a certain point that going to the cemetery doesn't mean as much anymore because really they're in our hearts, right? That's how I feel, I guess. Maybe you don't feel the same way,
Yeah.
but
I think in the beginning, that was the connection I had. I would agree with you. And then I realized that connection can be with me and I don't have to physically go there. But I needed to have that experience, right? I didn't need someone told me, well, Justin, Aaron's not there. That isn't helpful. All those things people say aren't actually not helpful, even though I know their intention is good. I hope that I value life and don't take it for granted now that I've walked this journey for this length of time. I hope I'm a better friend, daughter, sister, mother, partner because I value life more. It's sometimes, Angela, the permanence is so difficult, and I know you know this. And the farther away the permanence is, sometimes it's a little harder.
I get that.
Last night we were talking about favorite foods of our loved ones in our support group. And I asked myself, do I know what your favorite food is, Aaron? Maybe you didn't have a favorite food. And then somebody else mentioned that they're writing things down that they think they're forgetting about their child. And I really had to pause. Am I forgetting things? And I don't think I am. I can still hear Aaron. I can still see Aaron. Will I be able to do that forever? I hope. Aaron's 30, not 20. That stuff is hard.
Yeah, 30 and then it's the loss of the future spouse and grandchildren and everything that could have been, should have been. I think that's also something that comes up as milestones come up, right? As you see people your son's age going on with their lives and doing those things that we expected our children to do.
Yes, 100%. I'm fortunate to have surviving children because, I know people that don't. I know people that have lost 2 children to this disease, which is unbelievably devastating to me.
I've had some of them on my podcasts, and I even had one woman who lost 5 of her 12 children in this way. And I know it's unfathomable, but it happens to
Yep.
people, which leads me to a question about stopping this from happening. There's lots of people that want to just have some succinct answer, and we know there isn't one. But what do you think the path is for this country? And I know you've been involved in advocacy and policy and all of these things. What do you think the path is for this country to get out of this, to end this epidemic?
I honestly don't know. I think it's a multitude of paths. I don't think it's one path. I think we have a mental unwellness crisis that we aren't addressing. I think we have perhaps a value system that is too hard for adolescents to live up to. And we've got ourselves on this hamster wheel we can't get off. We have made a substance a solution, and outside of me, and I'm guilty of it, Angela. I mean, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, let me find some macaroni and cheese, or what can I buy to
Yes. We all are, right? We all are. Yeah.
instant gratification, right? And so a substance as a solution is our problem. How can we change that? We, as Americans, consume 80% of the world's opioids. We put ourselves here. We can get ourselves out, but we have to start relying on a chemical as a solution and figure out what's the other solution for all the different reasons why we medicate. Some people do need medication because their brain chemistry, but we need to stop the reasons that we seek a substance, and then the demand will go away, right? It's
Right.
about demand. It's not about supply.
It's 100% about demand. It's also about greed. And I always remind people when they start talking about China and Mexico, and yes, we know where these things originate from. We know where they come from. We know how they get here. We know where they're being made. But once they're here, we've got Americans selling to other Americans. About 85% of the drugs being dealt in this country. And I keep saying that because I want people to wake up and listen to what, that You have fellow Americans killing fellow Americans. That's what's happening. In my daughter's case, there were no Mexican cartel members charged with a crime, but there were 3 Americans who all went to federal prison, and she wasn't the only person that died from their actions. So
Mm,
I wanna remind people of that. It's a demand, and it's also this is many people's way to earn quick cash, quick money, easy
right,
money, and also feed their own
right.
habits, which is cyclical.
100%.
Like you said, and I love that you said, "I don't really know," because that's a really honest answer. If somebody had an easy answer, it would be done by now, right?
Well, right. I went to the gas station this morning and I bought a pack of Tic Tacs and a pack of gum for my mother, and it was $10, Angela.
Wow.
And I got in my car and I thought to myself, how can anyone survive? So if I can't afford and I haven't been raised in a family with resources and I haven't been privileged with resources, and the street and this person says, if you sell this stuff, you can have this much money. Like, why would I not do that? Because I
Right.
don't know any better, right? And I'm not excusing the drug dealers. I'm not excusing the drug dealers at all. But some of them are doing it because they have their own substance use disorder disease. It's so hard, so hard.
Right. Right, and we need more hands on deck and less stigma. So if there were less stigma, we'd have more people taking action, and we'd have more resources to fall back on to try to end this epidemic.
Yes, which is why we have to hold on to those little wins.
That's right. That's right.
We have a camp program, Angela. I don't know if you're familiar. It's a camp for children ages 9 to 12 who have a family member affected by substance use disorder. So these are one of the programs that we have at Overdose Lifeline that give me all that hope, right? Because these kids are 9 years old, for example, who are completely innocent but don't understand why their parent has chosen drugs over them, right? And it sets them up to be in a pretty difficult situation and potentially to use substances later in life. We do this year round with these kids for free. And one of the camp directors told me yesterday about one of the campers who the grandmother or something said she doesn't have any friends. And now the grandmother reports that she has friends at camp and she's making friends at school. So we are directly changing her little path and giving her some tools she might not have gotten. And those are the things, right, that help sort of counterbalance the heaviness around the magnitude and the challenge of this complex situation.
Right. With our Emily's Hope K through 5 education curriculum, I was able to speak to some students in 3rd grade after they got it last spring. I was in one classroom where several kids were dealing with parents or a relative who suffered from substance use disorder. And what they learned put it in context for them, like they didn't understand it before. I thought, wow, that's amazing that now they have some context for what their relative is going through that helps them understand that it's a disease of the brain, that their brain has been overtaken by the substance, and it's not them, and they're not a bad person. That is so valuable to learn at a young age.
Oh, I remember the profound impact it had on me when someone said, I can love you even though I don't like some of the things that you do. And I was like, really? Okay. So it's the same sort of concept, the behavior of your parents has nothing to do with how lovable you are, young person. And you and your existence is not a reflection of their choices and their disease.
Right, right. Well, I love that sentiment. And on that note, we can wrap up the podcast. I really want to thank you for coming on. And I have a feeling we're going to run into each other some more. So,
Yep, I agree 100%. Thank you so much, Angela, for doing this work and for the K through 5 curriculum and just having the podcast and helping people with processing through grief because it's so challenging. So I commend you 100% and I'm so grateful.
well, right back at you for the work you've been doing for twice as long as I have been doing. So, I really appreciate everything you leading by example. We appreciate you taking the time to learn about one of the top killers of Americans, fentanyl. If you found this episode helpful, please consider giving us a positive review, that's 5 stars, and sharing it with friends and family. Join us again next week as we sit down with one of the most popular podcasters in the country. Megan Judge has seen a lot of success throughout her career, and she's married to a Hollywood actor. Now, she speaks out about the trauma she survived, starting at a very young age.
We're here for such a short time on this planet. There's got to be a reason why these things happen, and what you do with the aftermath is what really matters.
Hear Megan's advice for rising above life's challenges in next week's episode of Grieving Out Loud. Until then, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wanenberg King and Anna Phi.